And we are live. Welcome, everybody, to the Great Comms Debate 4. So this is the fourth time we are organizing our quarterly debate. And it's really great to see so many people. I know it's July. A lot of people are on holiday, so it's really great to see so many people already joining and looking forward to the session. Something that we like to do at the beginning of these sessions is get to know where everybody's calling in from. So you'll see on the right-hand side of your screen, you have a little questions tab. So feel free to drop into that questions tab, just write where you're calling in from. We like to see where people are dialing in. All right, but today I'm really happy to be joined by three world star comms professionals. Guys, thank you so much for joining us today. And maybe if we could, to kick things off, if we could get you guys to maybe introduce yourselves, tell us a little bit about yourself, the organization you work for, and as well, because you can see how many people are typing in the chat, if you can tell us where you're dialing in from as well. So how about we start with you, Rachel M.
Sure. Hi, I'm Rachel Miller. I'm the director of All Things IC. I'm a consultant, trainer, and mentor, and I work with internal communication professionals to help them be brilliant at what they do. And I'm coming to you from my guest bedroom in West London, UK.
Well, it's about as good an office as any during this time, I'm sure. Thanks so much, Rachel, for joining us. How about the other Rachel, Rachel T?
Hi. I'm Rachel Thornton. I'm co-founder and co-owner of Scarlettabbott. We are a UK-based but globally operating consultancy. We work in four main areas: strategy, insights, communication, change, and culture. That's five, but a couple of them clustered together. And I'm coming to you, strangely, from the New Forest. That's not where I'm from. I'm from York in Yorkshire. I'm here for a week's holiday. And the cottage that I'm renting has no Wi-Fi, so I'm holed up in a friend's place of work, 10 miles away from where I'm holidaying. It was a bit of a panic yesterday on the practice.
Yeah, we did a bit of a dry run yesterday, and Rachel was having some issues with her internet. So glad you have a stable connection now. And thanks for taking time out of your holiday to be with us today.
You're welcome.
All right, and last but not least, Steve Crescenzo. Steve, how about you give a bit of an introduction?
Thank you guys so much. It's great to be here. I'm Steve Crescenzo with Crescenzo Communications. We are a two-person firm. It's my wife, Cindy, and I, and we've been around for 23 years, specializing in employee communications. We do audits, we do training. We've worked all over the world, all over the globe, from Saudi Arabia down to Rio de Janeiro, lots of work in Europe. And we just go in and help companies assess their communications and improve them, everything from strategy to tactics. And Rachel, I'm interested that you say you're the director of all things I see. My wife seems to insist that she's the director of all things that she sees. So I need to introduce you to her because she needs help.
Sounds good.
Well, thanks, Steve. And you're calling in from Chicago?
Oh, I'm sorry. Yes, Chicago, Illinois, sprawling headquarters of Crescenzo Communications.
Yes, and now, like, just looking at the chat, I'm seeing we got a pretty good global spread. I'm seeing right now at the top, I'm seeing Belgium, Canada, UK, Chicago-ish. I'm seeing Malaysia. Isn't it? It should be midnight in Malaysia. So props to Malar for joining us at such a late hour. All right, but just a few quick guidelines, kind of some housekeeping. So we have 6 statements prepared, all related to the practice of internal communications. What we'll do is we'll go through each statement, and then each speaker will briefly have time to kind of agree or disagree and explain their stance on that specific statement, and then we'll open up for general kind of open discussion. While this is going on, feel free to tweet at us or post on LinkedIn with the hashtag #GreatCommsDebate, or just follow that hashtag. Our marketing manager will also be covering the session on those platforms. Also, one thing that I want to mention is we typically do Q&A throughout the session. So at any time, if you have a question related to anything that our speakers are talking about, feel free to drop it in the chat. We'll get to it if we can fit it into the discussion. All right, but with that, I think we can go ahead and get started with the very first statement. So the first statement reads,
Disagree. Was that too soon? I'm sorry.
That's what we like to see.
Okay, sorry.
So statement 1 reads, if you have broad communication skills, you can't specialize in internal comms. And this is an interesting one, because when I saw this one, I was kind of like, that's a little bit paradoxical. I don't necessarily think like that. So I'm interested to hear if you guys agree or disagree. But Rachel Miller, how about we start with you?
I disagree. I think if you have broad comm skills, then you can specialize in internal communications.
All right. How about Rachel Thornton?
Completely disagree, wholeheartedly. The act of specialising means that you choose a specialist subject, internal comms, for example. But I think broad communication skills are the foundation of great internal communicators.
Gotcha. How about you, Steve?
I couldn't disagree more. In fact, I disagree more than those two combined. Yes, I do. I disagree. I win this one. I disagree the most, and let me know when we can talk a little bit about why, but I certainly disagree with this.
Look, you all had your chance to put out your opinion about the statement. So Steve, you're on a roll. How about you continue? Why do you disagree?
Well, very quickly, it's just not only it's the exact opposite of what the statement says. I don't think you can be a good internal communication specialist unless you do have experience and background in all those other areas. When you get employee communications right, when you do it right, when you're strategic, when you're measurable, when you do everything right, the content is great. Well, you're doing media relations, because all your employees are on social media, and they're all journalists. Basically, they're all talking about the brand, talking about the culture. So if you get employee communications right, you're doing media relations. You're doing marketing and sales, because they're out there talking about your products and services in an intelligent fashion. You're doing community relations, because they're talking about the company's commitment to being green or whatever it might be. So if you are doing employee communications right, you've got fingers in all those areas anyway, and you better know a little bit about those areas. Because if you just sit in your little bubble of internal comms and you don't look at PR and you don't look at marketing, you don't look at sales, you are never going to be respected in the organization. Nobody wants someone just doing internal and that's all you do. Especially nowadays, the wall between internal and external has crumbled. Internal is external. Companies are starting to use employees as brand ambassadors, as spokespeople on social media. So if you want to stay inside your little internal bubble, good luck, because the world's going to pass you by pretty quickly.
Right. It's interesting that you all were so kind of passionately disagreeing about this. I know we had Rachel, we had a good discussion. Rachel Miller. Now I need to go to Rachel M and Rachel M and Rachel T. Rachel M. We had a good discussion yesterday during the kind of dry run about that you had with a client. I think it was about this topic. Maybe you can share the nuggets of information we discussed about.
Sure. So the reason I put this statement forward was because somebody got in touch with me and said, I've got a really strong background in marketing and external comms, but I'm really interested in internal communication. And I feel like because I've got broad comm skills, I can't specialize in internal comms. And I said, show me your CV. Let me have a look at the skills that you've got and let me look at your experience and my gut feel was, of course you can. There will be transferable skills in there. Let's just have a look and see what you've done and then analyze how do we transfer those across into internal comms if you're passionate about employee comms, particularly, which this person was. And there was so much in there, such a rich variety of skills in there that it was really easily transferable. But they said this statement that, well, surely it's known if you have broad comms skills, you can't specialize in internal comms. So I was curious to find out what people think, and that's why I proposed putting this statement in.
So Rachel T, what did you think about this when you said that you disagree?
I thought, well, this is nonsense. So I also think there's a piece here. If you have been in the industry longer than probably 10, 15, or like me, 20 years, you were a broad comms skilled person. I was a journalist. I think Rachel and you were as well.
I was, yeah.
I've worked in PR, and I found the kind of love of my career in internal communication. But I went straight into my first internal comms job, fully loaded with skills that made me absolutely effective from day one. I think that broad skills, it's reading, it's writing, it's listening, It's understanding information and being able to convey that and understand different audiences. And whether you're in marketing or PR or external comms, you're doing that anyway. I think this statement assumes that it assumes a fixed mindset rather than a growth one. You can learn. People learn. That's how we're made, you know. So you can learn the particular discipline that internal communication, you know, that you thrive in internal communication on. And then, you know, I think, as we said before, specialism is about differentiating yourself. You know, it makes you stand out in the marketplace. And so it's great to specialise. And within internal communication, people specialise in insights or strategy or training or coaching. But the broad kind of skill base enables you to do the do. And in internal communication, there are very few of us who just sit and think big thoughts. You know, we are a profession that get our hands dirty. And so it enables us to have the flexibility to do whatever is required of us. And also, horrible lockdown word coming, pivot, enables us to swiftly change direction if the market or our organisation needs us to.
Right. Are there any, like, just interested on kind of on the topic, are there any skills that you guys think would be more or like most important for someone that's looking to specialize in internal communications? For example, maybe writing or you know, reading was something that Rachel T mentioned. Is there a skill that really stands out above others?
I think there's curiosity for me. If you are curious, then that's one of the key behaviours that's drawn out of the Institute of Internal Communication profession map. Around the outside, there's behaviours that you need to have. There's 6 core skills, but behaviours underpin that. And curiosity is a great one to have. So if you are constantly, you know, asking questions, trying to discover the root cause of stories and why do we do things the way we do things around here, then that's a really great attribute to have. There's a comment I can see about passion where passion trumps specialized experience every time, except for neurosurgery, was the comment that came in, which I thought was great. But if you're passionate and if you're curious, then it's a good mindset to have, I think.
I certainly agree with that. And, you know, obviously I was wondering, you know, they're both so smart, both the Rachels, because they're journalists. So we have 3 journalists on the call here. And I think that is the best background for communications. I really do, because you learn writing, which is the core of everything. But I think the thing that's missing in communications is interviewing skills. People, like getting out and talking to people. And I think we've gotten very lazy as a profession. We write stories and content off emails. We write it off PowerPoint decks. We become deckheads. We don't pick up the phone and get that great quote anymore. We make up a quote. We don't leave our cubicles enough.
We don't make up quotes, Steve.
And we make up bad quotes. That's the problem. If you make up quotes, you got to make up good quotes. But you know, we don't. You know, this is pre-COVID, obviously, but we don't leave our cubicle enough. We don't get out there and talk to people, establish sources like a journalist would, establish pipelines into the various areas of the organization. We need to get out more and interview and ask that second, third, fourth question that gets to the good content. I think that's a big skill that's kind of lacking right now, I think.
Yeah.
Right.
I think there's a couple of things which really brilliant internal communicators possess. Commerciality, understanding how business works. I think communicators do themselves a disservice if they focus solely on the creative and the storytelling, and they don't understand and realise that they work in their organisations to service the delivery of a strategy and to achieve commercial or business or organisational goals. So being able to talk the language of the C-suite is absolutely fundamental. And I also think there's some really interesting, you know, probably more in the last few years, kind of additional science skills, which internal communicators are getting excited about. You know, organisational psychology, behavioural science, you know, the science of why people do what they do and how to influence them is taking the profession into a really interesting and kind of you know, sciencey space. So I think that's something which people can really, you know, kind of get behind and grow themselves with.
Right. Well, look, guys, I think we could talk about this the whole session. We'd probably need a specific session just for this topic. But I think in the interest of time, let's go ahead and check out our next statement. I see all these great questions in the chat. We'll try to get to everything, or as many as we can. But yeah, statement 2 reads that every employee is a member of the IC/comms team now. And I like the definition that now. So was this not something that was going on before? Interested to hear your thoughts. Rachel T, you proposed this one. So what do you feel? Do you agree or disagree?
Yes, I agree. This is true.
All right. How about you, Steve?
Disagree.
There we go. We got our the gloves are off. All right. Rachel Miller, how about you?
I'm in the middle on this one, so I half agree, half disagree, and there's rationale behind why, but I'm on the fence on this one.
Well, so now we have. It's interesting when you have a kind of like a yes, no. You have 2 options, but you have 3 different responses: a yes, a no, and a in between. Rachel T, I'm interested to hear, because again, you proposed the statement. What do you think? Where did this come from? And specifically, if you could outline why now? Why is it now?
Sure. Okay. So do you want me to do that quickly, and then we'll get into more detail after?
You do it. You go as in depth as you want. Now we're open discussion.
Okay. So this is true, whether we and Mike like it or not, and whether employees realise it or not. And I guess the big change is technology, the way we communicate. Email's now old hat in a lot of organisations, and people are using ESNs and other platforms like Yammer Team and Workplace. So employees are able to like, share and comment with that functionality and take part in conversations that are internal communications, cap I, cap C. So whereas an employee used to only be able to kind of amplify their voice to the people around their desk, now they can talk to the whole organisation, which makes them, in my view, a valuable part of the internal communication team.
Yeah, that's interesting, because in communications in general, there's so much talk about this kind of idea of cascading communications throughout the organization through employees, and then you have your net power of network effects, the employees that drive discussion in an organization. Rachel M or Steve, do you guys have anything to add here?
Well, what a load of rubbish. No, I'm just kidding. I just wanted to say that at some point. I obviously agree with Rachel, but because of one thing she said, whether or not we like it or whether or not we can, she's exactly right. I mean, the gatekeepers are all gone. It used to be we put the newsletter out. We had all access email. There was no internal social media. We were in charge of everything, and now everybody is participating in the communication process. And she's exactly right. The reason I disagree is because I get nervous. For actually what Rachel T said earlier, and what we just talked about, all the specific skill sets that internal communicators have, yes, they're all commenting and they're liking and they're sharing and they're all participating in it, but I don't want them on my team necessarily. They're more like rogue communicators that I got to be wary of. I gotta pay attention to them. I gotta see what they're saying, and I gotta tap into that, and I gotta make sure I'm in tune with it. But as far as the people on my team, we have a certain set of objectives that we need to, if I have 100 people out there and they're talking about the cafeteria menu, does that mean they're on my team? No. But she's right. We have to acknowledge the existence of these communicators, and we have to use them whenever we can. We have to take advantage of them when we can in a good way, and we have to at least acknowledge them and tap into them. But I would say, I get very nervous that a couple of experts a couple of years ago, 5 years ago maybe, were saying internets are going to go away, this is going to go away. Communicators are going to become just curators of information. We're going to be the ones pulling stuff from all the social media sites and curating the information. And I never agreed with that, and I always fought against it. We have such a set of skills, internal, like nobody would say everybody's on the accounting team, everybody's on the marketing team, everybody's on, you know what I mean? So we need to make sure that what we're doing, the strategic communication, is happening at all levels. And these other communicators, small c communicators, we need them. It's good to have them. We get feedback. It's like an ongoing focus group. It's wonderful. But are they part of the team? It gets a little dicey for me, because I'm pretty proud of what we do, and they can't do it. So That's why I disagree. Just because I wanted to disagree with something.
Good for you.
Standing up for yourself. Rachel M., you're in the middle on this. What do you think?
The reason I'm in the middle is because I believe internal communication is too important to be left down to one team, one department, one function. It's everyone's responsibility. However, when you have a comms team in place, we are specialists and we know, and I've written a lot about curation. I believe that we are, we're not just content creators, we're content curators, and there's a certain skill to that. So call it strategic narrative, if you will. Take employee generated content and make it fit together, curate that story. That's a very clear role for an internal comms team. But I really welcome the fact that employees can have their own voices and share their own content and do their own blogs and vlogs without the involvement of the internal comms team. I think I'm really encouraged that and welcome that. I think what good looks like for me in organizations is where the comms team are a center of excellence, where you help your employees get the best out of your comms channels. So if you're role modeling good behavior and you're setting top 5 things to remember when writing a story, for example, why not do that? Why not give that freedom and flexibility out to your employees? Doesn't mean they're part of the comms team, but it means that everyone's responsible for communicating. So that's why I'm on the fence, because I agree and disagree. Hopefully that's clear. You can see why.
Can I add one thing real quick, Alex? What Rachel M. just said is huge. And the world of employee-generated content is the future. So that's where Rachel T. is exactly right. But they need help. You're right, Rachel M. They need guidance. If we can get user-generated content around, instead of just saying, say whatever you want, you're right about whatever. If we get user-generated content about strategic objectives and things that help the company succeed, let's say we have a new initiative, we have a new marketing push, we have a new whatever it might be, and we can get people like the Mayo Clinic. I have somebody from the Mayo Clinic on here. They have this thing called the Mayo Effect. It was a concept that whatever you do at work affects not only your patients, but the community. It affects everybody, their families. And they did a film festival, all user-generated content. They said, use your cell phones and do a 1-minute film on what the Mayo Effect means to you. And they got a slew of people to send in these really creative, great videos. They did a red carpet event where they did a premiere and they did a contest online on the internet. That sort of stuff is so powerful. And, whenever you can get that opinion of the people closest to the work, and not just the executives, not just the higher ups, you get the people who are actually doing the work and you get them to contribute content in ways that you want them to and that are important to the organization as a whole. That's gold. Right.
I think there's two kind of good questions / comments related to this topic, and specifically when we're talking about user-generated content. Here, Will is saying that user-generated content should be fostered as it becomes more relatable to other employees, and IC can become the strategic advisors and supporters. Whereas then Nico's kind of asking, in this context, should IC people have the role of bridge, advisor, and strategic provider? So what do you guys think about this? Will IC people in the realm of kind of user-generated content, is the role of IC to become kind of this support, this enabler of this function?
I think, certainly from my perspective, that user-generated content, the kind of rise of citizen journalism, as it were, is useful for several different ways. One, it's insight. If people are talking about something which the organisation isn't talking about, then we need to know that, because those conversations are happening, whether we like it or not. And I'd rather know. Knowledge is, kind of power. I'd rather know what my colleagues want to talk about if it's not what I'm communicating, and if it's not what the CEO and the exec team want them to be talking about. So I think it's insight. And I think there's all these kind of stream of semi-consciousness going on in organisations, these conversations, rich conversations happening, that one, if we understand, we can take part in. But two, I think absolutely, as the other guys have said, we can harness some of that citizen journalism, and small teams, and comms teams are often small, can then use those rogue teammates, as my esteemed colleague described them, to be generators of content and to create and to fill space where we don't have the resource sometimes in comms teams. Of course, the comms team, the formal comms team, the skilled, the trained, the experienced comms team should be having the strategic conversations, coaching senior leaders, helping them to, get the strategic narrative out into the organization. But I think we can unearth far more stories using the whole team than we ever can as a comms team. And I think we can actually harness, the rise of citizen journalism to help us with authenticity. And there's a lot going on in the world now. The kind of speaking truth to power and truth telling is really, really powerful. And there's nowhere to hide. There's fewer places in our organization to hide now. And I think those leaders who are have been a little bit more reluctant have no excuse, because they've got a smartphone in their hand and everyone else is doing it. So, they really can find a way to kind of talk to their people more often and easier and simpler and on a lower budget.
Yeah, right. I think that Rachel just said something that's so crucial, and that is one of our biggest roles as employee communications folks is to coach our leaders to be okay with this. And we're seeing, we talked about this on the last debate, post-COVID, I've been doing a lot of leadership interviews, a ton. I did 2 this morning before this debate, and you're hearing this from leaders that are saying, we got to be more transparent, we got to be more human. Communications has to be more participatory now, more interactive. So leaders are starting to get it, and we need to push them along and keep pushing them. And they need help, because it's not always going to be neat and tied up. It might get sloppy, it might get messy. People might voice an opinion that's not popular, but as Rachel said, everybody's saying it. Now they're just saying it out in public space. We need to coach our leaders that the world has changed. It's not like when we came back from World War II, when we started all these companies, and Brad Whitworth is on the call right now, and he just pointed this out to me. He said, one of the great things we don't realize is that most corporations were founded, big corporations, after World War II, and they were founded by ex-military that came in with a command and control, we'll tell you what to do, you do it. Mm-hmm. Well, those days are gone. Now people want to be involved, they want to say, they want to be participatory, they want to comment, the world's changed, and we got a lot of leaders that need to be brought screaming and kicking into this brave new world.
Right. Well, again, I like this because we had some, differing opinions at first, but then kind of found some common ground towards the end. I think there's a lot to be said about user-generated content in general, not just in the realm of IC. It's everywhere these days. So really happy that it's also being picked up in the internal comms world.
So Alex, who do you think won that one?
I don't know. We'll let the audience decide.
I think Rachel might have. Go ahead.
All right. But yeah, let's move on to keep the show rolling. Let's move on to statement number 3, which reads: when it comes to earning respect in their organizations, communicators are their own worst enemy. And this, I feel like this one can be interpreted in a few different ways. So Steve, maybe you want to kick us off with this one? Do you agree or disagree?
Yes, I agree 1,000%, and people might not want to hear it, but I do agree. We have a lot of enemies. I mean, companies are set up to make us fail with our approval processes and our daft leaders and our people that just write for the approver and not for the reader. And there's a lot of people that want us to fail, believe it or not. But when it comes down to it, we're our own worst enemy. And I can elaborate after we get other votes.
All right. Rachel Miller, what do you feel about this one?
I agree with Keith Riley-Whittingham. We should switch the Z for an S, as was just pointed out in the comments. So thank you for that, Keith. I agree with this. I think that we don't help ourselves in many situations. So happy to elaborate in a moment when Rachel T has given her view.
I like it. So you'll also notice which speaker proposed which statement from, if it's written with a Z or an S. You can all probably guess that this one came from Steve. All right, Rachel T, how do you feel about this one?
Yeah, I think if we added the word some, I definitely agree. I completely agree with some of what Steve said, and I think some communicators are absolutely their own worst enemies for a multitude of reasons. By the same token, I think some are absolutely not. So I hate being on the fence. I'm either there or I'm there. So I guess I agree, but I'm putting some in there.
Reluctant agreement. Well, Steve, you're so
Sure.
passionate about this one, so maybe you can elaborate a little bit.
Sure. But I thought the rules were we couldn't add words to the statement, Alex. Rachel's adding words to the statement.
This is a debate. It's a free-for-all.
All right. Okay. All right. I think we are our own worst enemy, and for a couple reasons. One, Rachel T actually said already, we're journalists, we're writers, we're creative. We tend to gravitate towards that, creating great content, great visuals, great infographics, cool videos. We tend to gravitate towards that, and we need to be able to be good at that. At least coach people to be good at it, or good at it ourselves. But I remember I was doing an audit for WestJet, and I had an interview with the CEO, and I said, "So what do you want out of your communications team?" He goes, "Steve, I'm really tired of them coming to me and saying, 'What do you want us to do?' I want them to come to me and say, 'I know what you're trying to achieve as the executive of this company. Here's how communications can help you make it happen.'" I don't think enough communicators do that. A, they're afraid of executives for some reason, and B, the second thing is they don't. Rachel said it again. They don't speak truth to power. I was on a call today doing an executive interview with the second in command at a pretty big company, and the CEO of that company sends out long, thumb-sucking, 8-page emails to employees that nobody reads. We're doing a survey. I have the survey results right here. Nobody's reading this guy's email. Nobody will tell him. Nobody will tell him because he's the main guy. So now I got to go in there as the consultant and tell him that his baby's ugly. Listen, your baby's ugly. Nobody's reading your stupid email. It's thumb-suckingly long, and it's awful, and you're using big words that you shouldn't use, and you bury the most important stuff, and I can do it because I'm a consultant. You know, I'm the big fat guy from Chicago. He's got to listen to me. He paid me money. Communicators on the spot, on site, have to nerve up and go into that office and say, and preferably they can do it with data. They can do it and say, instead of saying, I think your email sucks, John, they can say, you know, we got data that shows nobody's reading it. So I think, A, we tend to shift more towards the creative and not the strategic, which Rachel mentioned. And we will never be taken seriously as long as that happens. We need to go into leaders saying, you know what, here's our initiatives, here's our quarterly objectives, here's the things that we're going to do with integrated communication campaigns. They're going to change the behavior in this organization that we need to change to make it happen. And then 2, when they're screwing up, when they're doing long videos, 4-minute videos, hostage videos where they're just talking into the camera like this, and we are enabling our core transparency, complementary, blah, blah, paradigm shifts. And if they're doing those hostage videos, we need to say, listen, have a conversation. They need coaching. Most communicators don't do that. They veer towards the creative, and they don't speak truth to power. So that's why I think that we are often our own worst enemy. We don't stand up for ourselves enough either.
Anyone else want to take a crack at that?
So I think
I agree. I think, yeah, I've already talked about commerciality, understanding why we're in business. I think that, as Steve said, you know, we've got to move from being creatives first to being consultants and being coaches, because, you know, what drives me bananas about our industry is this, how can we get a seat at the table conversation? Yeah. Oh my God, take it. Be good at your job. Be a coach, you know. So I think, yeah, absolutely. Senior people listen to insight and, you know, not just data, but what does that mean? And well-presented data, as in insight about our organisation, is gold dust. And I've never had a senior person in an organisation say, no thanks, don't want any of that. Right. I think we can absolutely be more outcome-focused. A good friend and client of mine, Paul Diggins, he says, awareness is not an outcome. And that's absolutely true. So much of what some communicators do is just do awareness. And we need to be focused on the outcomes that our communication activities will deliver for our organisation. Yeah. And of course, we need to measure them. And yeah, I think absolutely the industry, or not everyone, certainly not me. Some people in communications are poor at challenge, feel uncomfortable with challenge, because you know, we're all really nice people, and nice people often feel uncomfortable with challenge, and so challenging senior folks is difficult, but it's a skill that we've got to learn and be good at. Yeah. To enable all of that expertise to find its mark.
Yeah, you know what? Communicators want to be liked. We have a desperate need to be liked, and we got to shake that a little bit. And I agree with you, Rachel. Take the seat at the table. I'm sick of hearing about how you want it. Stop knocking on doors and start kicking them down. Get there. Show your value. Show your value, and take yourself more seriously. I'm sorry. Go ahead. This was my question, so I'm a little worked up. Sorry.
Right, Rachel Miller, you're about to launch into something. What do you think about this? Do you think it's now time to take the seat at the table?
I'm also sick of the seat at the table discussion. My answer always, if we're going down the seat at the table route, is if you're not sat at that proverbial table, then you book the room, you bring the chairs, and you gather the right people in the room. Don't wait to be asked. Don't wait to be invited. I also think if we've done our job well, it shouldn't matter if you're not sat at the board table, because every single person around that board table should know that communication falls under their jurisdiction. It's not a 10-minute update at the end of the board meeting when the comms pro is wheeled in. That's not the thing. Going to this question, I think I'm curious about earning respect. I think to earn respect, you need to show up, you need to deliver, you need to execute extremely well in what you do. And part of that for me is being really clear around, what does great internal comms look like in your organization? And you earn respect by showing up and delivering what matters and measuring what matters. So often the language there, and I completely agree with Rachel around outcomes. I think if you want to earn respect, you need to show how all the time, money, and effort you're investing is paying off and how it's helping the organization achieve its strategy, because that's what we're here to do. So to earn respect, be present, be conscious of the way that you're working, and use the data Steve was talking about earlier, turn that into contextual intelligence. Information tells us this, so this is what we need to do differently as a result. That's how you earn respect, I think.
I think that's brilliant. That was brilliant. And 2 comments from the people in the chat room. Keith Riley said, "Build your own damn table." I love that. That's what I tell people all the time. Forget about trying to get on their table. Build your own damn table that they want to be a part of. They have the best table in the whole company, and they'll be fighting down you. And also, Eric Goodwin said we need more women in leadership. Yes, women are smarter and they're nicer and they take criticism better than these men. I'm sick of beating my head against the wall with them. Anyway, go ahead. Men are stubborn.
Steve, I feel like you're a guy that deals well with criticism.
Yeah, no, I don't.
All right. I think we can kind of, again, in the interest of time, I love these. These are getting so not heated in a good way, these discussions. I love, there's a great statement by an earlier comms debate participant where we were talking about if everybody was going to have a similar opinion. And we came to the conclusion that violent agreement is also nice to see on air. But yeah, let's go ahead and move to the 4th statement, which reads, most comms professionals don't know the difference between internal communication and internal communications. And I have to admit that I had never really thought about that distinction until yesterday when we discussed this. And Rachel Miller, you proposed this one. So how about you? Do you agree or disagree with this?
Violently agree.
Violently agree.
If we're going down violently agree, I strongly agree that most people don't know the difference or don't know if it matters or why it matters. Right.
How about Rachel T?
My response is so what?
So what? It doesn't matter. I'm looking forward to. I'm looking forward to hearing the justification. Steve, how about you?
I don't violently disagree, but I do disagree for reasons I'll make clear later.
All right. Well, this is another interesting one. We're having some differing opinions here. Rachel, you, Rachel M, you proposed the statement, and we had a good discussion about it. Maybe you can kind of relive that and explain your thought process here.
Sure. So the difference for me, how I define the difference, is internal communication is the overarching way a company communicates. And that could be things that fall outside of the jurisdiction of a comms team. It could be down to signage even in a building, or conversations that happen between a leader and their team. And then internal communications are the tools, the tactics, channels, methodology. And the reason it's important for me to have a distinction between them is because when you're trying to audit internal comms particularly, or internal communication as a whole, what are we auditing? Because very often we want to understand how do we communicate as a whole organization, so internal communication. But when we ask employees and we listen to employees, we generate conversations around channels, which is very different. Right. So I think it's important to set your stall out properly and understand there is a difference between internal communication and internal communications. And part of that is who's responsible for what.
All right, Rachel T. You said so what? So
Yeah.
that Rachel Miller made some pretty good, convincing points there. What do you? What do you think?
And I fully respect Rachel M's viewpoint, but I'm still on the so what. You know, I hear all of that, and of course, there's a difference. But to be fair, nobody else in the organisation cares. It's one of those navel-gazing questions that internal comms people ask themselves. You know, what's this? What's that? People in the organisation don't know the difference, nor should they have to. And I think you can completely successfully audit and measure the two different things without getting into semantics. Tomatoes, tomatoes. You know, I think an internal communication professional knows the difference. Or if they don't, they're probably doing the right things anyway. But I think we've got such bigger fish to fry that I really don't think it matters.
Right.
Can you just say tomato versus tomato again in your English? That's so cool.
I'm trying to do it in American. Tomato.
Tomato.
The reason I disagreed, and I guess I really don't, I agree with both the Rachels, but I do disagree that I think they absolutely do know the difference. They choose to ignore it. And here's what whenever we do, my wife does probably 100 focus groups a year. She has to spend the first 3 or 4 minutes of every group saying, we're talking about these communications, not what you get from here, or there. Mm-hmm. You know, every company communicates constantly. That's why everyone's part of the IC team. We're talking about our channels, our vehicles. So she has to explain that, which shows you how confused everybody is about it. I think most communicators know about all this other clutter out there. They know HR is sending out 800 emails a week. They know IT is sending out 400 a week. They know that this guy's having it. And they choose to ignore all that other clutter so they can get their stuff out. And by doing that, they're over-communicating. And they're adding to the clutter. They're not taking into, like right now we're working for a large government agency in the States. Federal government, one of the big ones, thousands and thousands of people. We are working for one division of that company, that department. And we are working on 3 projects out of 20 in that one department. And they give us their communication plans, and they're all sending out weekly, daily. I mean, they are just bombarding people with information. The communication illusion, where you get fooled into thinking that distribution is communication. They're just sending stuff out so they can check a box. Well, that's 3 departments. 3 projects of one department, of one group of the agency that has 8 million other people. We've got to be aware of everything that's going on out there, at least be aware of it. And I think most communicators are, and then they just got to block it out and say, well, I'm going to get my stuff out in the hopes that somebody pays attention to it. And I think that's dangerous. We need to be aware of everything that's happening because it's all competing with us. It's all competing for attention spans, which are shrinking and shrinking every day. So I think they do know it. I think a lot of them, unfortunately, choose to ignore it.
Interesting. I think it's still kind of goes like one of the things that kind of comes to mind here is something we talked about earlier, and which is the broad skill set and the kind of transferable skills. And if you think about it, these are 2 very different areas. Like the strategy, the strategic, the actual execution of a strategy is different from being able to, or knowing the channels and understanding the channels and being able to work the channels. So is this a situation where you need to have a broad skill set as an internal communicator to be able to encompass, all aspects? What do you guys think?
I think you just need clarity. You just need to talk with certainty around what is it that we're referring to, and making sure that very often I find that the purpose of internal communication isn't known in an organization. So if you want to get down into semantics and want to get down to language, make sure you've taken a step back first and gone, what is the purpose of internal communication? Why does it exist? What does good look like? Now, I believe the purpose of internal communication isn't telling people what to do. It's to create a shared understanding and shared meaning. Only when you do that can employees align themselves with the company's strategy. That's it. And you can have a statement like that and have certainty and clarity around this is how we show up, this is what we do. That's the most important thing. And then underneath that, the tools, tactics, methodology, everything else flows out of it. But that bit often I find is missing in organizations that I work with.
Right. And it kind of maybe, also even something that Steve mentioned was that people just choose to kind of ignore this or kind of ignore the fact that there is actually a difference and that you do need to kind of have that clarity to be successful.
I think it's also about if people want to feel like they want to be, strategic counsel and trusted advisors, and then that is internal communication. If you're only ever talking about tactics, channels, tools, internal communications, then funnily enough, you're not going to be seen as strategic if you're just talking about channels. So I think we don't help ourselves, and there's a lot that you could do to have consistency of approach in the way that you talk about how your organization communicates.
Right. I love that last bit. I think that's a good segue into our next statement. We have 15 minutes and 2 statements to go. So let's see if we can. Usually the comms debate runs a little over. I'm poor at keeping you guys on track most of the time. Let's see what we can do. All right. Statement 5 reads, "It's not change that people fear, it's uncertainty." I think almost that could just be the statement, but I like this elaboration. "And that's why so many change programs fail, because leaders and communicators don't realize," with an S, "and act on that." So Rachel T., you posed the statement. What do you agree or disagree with this? What do you feel?
I totally agree with it. I think there's way too much mysticism and a kind of this black arts around change.
Right.
And I think that's been created because a lot of people have made a lot of money, kind of changing organisations and communicating change. I think it's almost expected or even accepted that organisations do change badly. I hear it time and time again in my own consultancy work. Oh, we don't do change well. And it's, that's not really good enough. And I think it's become a bit of a mantra that people don't like change, almost letting ourselves off the hook of doing it well. So I completely agree with this, and I will elaborate more after my colleagues have also agreed.
All right, Steve, what do you think?
I agree more than Rachel.
More? Is that like you're trying to win out by just agreeing?
Somebody has to win the debate and somebody has to lose the debate. So I agree more than Rachel, way more. I'll elaborate later.
Rachel M., how about you?
I agree with this. I think the key bit there is uncertainty, and I think it's a bit too broad for me. I agree. I think there's a great comment here from Tim Rutter who says it's negative change that people fear. Yep. We all love. Oh, it just skipped. We all love positive change. The question often is how you frame it, and I totally agree with that. Totally agree with that.
Yeah, totally. That's the point, I think, from a psychology perspective. A good friend of mine, an exec coach called Charlie Sampson, and I need to name him because he'll accuse me of plagiarism if I say this. He says that people are fine with change, that they like change, that they seek out change. And why do we know that? Because millions of people buy lottery tickets. That is proof that people like change, but it's really good change, yeah? So when people don't know if change is going to be for the better, that's when the rot sets in, because individuals and in extreme cases, large organisations end up just getting paralysed by that uncertainty. So, it's really interesting. When we're uncertain, we need control. We seek control. And we've got something from a behavioural science perspective called the confirmation bias. So when we're worried about something, we seek out information that will confirm what we think about it. Yeah. So we look for, we confirm what we already know. And then also, helpfully, when it comes to change, we've got a negativity bias. Yeah. So it's easier to believe the bad stuff. We all know that. Yeah. And so we assume negativity and we think we're going to be worse off. Now, that's how we respond. That's how our brains respond. Yeah. And that's when survival mode kicks in, and it's fight and flight and resistance. And we don't want our employees feeling like that at work, clearly. So as leaders and comms people, we need to be mindful and design our communication and design our programs to recognise and address those truths. That is the truth of change. So we have to remind leaders to move slower. Remember what it was like when they first heard the change, because they've had ages and lots of information and lots of time to process that. And as communicators, it's our job to find the words, to find the stories, to design the activations and the interventions so that we move our people as quickly as possible from uncertainty into certainty. Yeah, that's when we find that our organisation isn't hung up on distraction and lack of focus, and God forbid productivity is dipping. Yeah, so we need to do that quickly, and we need to help people really understand the change. And there's generally a positive in it, whether it's for the organisation. You know, there are individuals who leave organisations and they don't want to. But for the organisation as a whole, we don't normally change things to make them worse. Yeah. So we need to get really good at finding that benefit story. So, you know, I think people can like change, embrace it, find it stimulating, find it refreshing, find it motivating, as long as they can see it's for the better. And so kind of our job is to find the story of change that makes it clear why it's better.
Yeah, I agree. I agree with everything Rachel said. Strongly agree. And, you know, every time we do a focus group with employees in a project that's undergoing, you know, first of all organizations change constantly. So the idea is kind of silly that change is this big thing. That's all we do is change. Otherwise, our employee newsletters will come out and say, nothing's changed. keep doing what you're doing. No, everything that we do is change oriented. We're all changing. I think when we sit in focus groups and the company is going through a negative change or an uncertain change or a merger, an acquisition, possible layoffs, we hear so often from employees, listen, tell the suits, tell the powers that be that we can handle any amount of bad news. What we can't handle is a vacuum. We cannot handle not knowing. And that's why I agree so strongly with this. They can handle bad news. They can handle any, you know, don't write change is the only constant. Don't do the David Bowie headline, change. I mean, we tend to just trivialize it when people were uprooting their lives some of the time. So deal with it. Treat them like adults. I hear that all the time. Tell them to treat you like an adult. They want to be part of the change. Someone on the text said that. Don't say we're changing you. Say you're going to be part of this change. People want to help. You look at any company, and 90% of the people want to help. They want to like where they work. They want to feel good about what they do. They want to have job security, which means changing. Then you got the 10% that are the lunatic fringe, and they're all alcoholics, and we can't worry about them anyway. You know, they beat their dogs and everything else. But the 90% of employees, they want to change. They're okay with change. And the other thing I would say is we need to coach our leaders. We can't no longer sit back with our arms crossed and wait until every I is dotted, every T is crossed. Mm-hmm. We know exactly what's going to happen because we don't, and we never will when it comes to organizational change. We've got to say, here's what we know. This is a process. Here's what we don't know yet. We'll let you know as soon as we do. We've got to be more human about that. And I think, you know, it's our nature in corporations and companies and leaders to keep it close to the vest. And we're not sure about that. So we can never look to be unsure or fallible. Like we have papal infallibility. We must know all things or they'll lose confidence in us and the company. Wrong. They lose confidence when they sense that you're not telling them everything. You're not telling them that you don't know stuff. So yeah, it comes down to us coaching our leaders to do change the right way. And someone said, we fail because we skip right to the tactics, right to the action plan. And we don't build the case for why it's necessary, what's in it for you. I always go back to the three sentences. What, so what, now what? What's the change? So what? Why is it so critical? Now what? What can you do to help us succeed? You do those three things well, with no jargon, no, you know, obfuscation, none of that, and you can succeed more often than you fail.
I think Steve's point there about knowing what you know is so critical. And I do that whenever I'm communicating change. I get a Word document, split it down the middle, and I map out my known knowns and my known unknowns. And my intention is to then move everything from the unknowns into the knowns. But when you're trying to communicate change, the uncertainty comes because you're not clear enough about your knowns, or you're not open enough to say, you know what, we don't quite know all the details yet. And part of that, and I couldn't agree more with what you were saying about leaders there, Steve, part of that for me is about getting leaders comfortable, being uncomfortable with ambiguity and uncertainty, and showing up and being present to say, we don't know everything yet, but you commit, you give a certainty of communication, even if you can't give certainty of content, which is, we will show up, we will keep you updated, a two-way conversation to help deal with the uncertainty so you can guide people through change. Problem we have at the moment in most organizations is constant change. So there was a comment in here about don't call it change programs, and I agree with that. If you're having a change program, it implies as a beginning, middle and end, and often, particularly at the moment, the change is open-ended. So that being comfortable, being uncomfortable, comfortable with ambiguity is critical. And if you're not sure what the temperature's like in the organization, you need to listen constantly. What are your people uncertain about? It could be language, it could be milestones, it could be lack of confidence that your leaders have got a plan, for example. But you need to make informed decisions by knowing what are our people uncertain about.
Yep.
Right.
Absolutely.
Right. Really, really good stuff. I think, Rachel, what you just said kind of about being able to acknowledge, as a leader, what you don't know is so important, because so often people are just inclined to make something up to make it look like they know. And then,
Always. Yeah.
every time. And then that just, leads to
doesn't help.
No. All right. But we have 6 minutes left. So I want to move ahead and go to the final statement for today, which reads, and this is an interesting one because I think it also depends a little on context. It is more dangerous to over-communicate than under-communicate. Steve, you proposed this one. So what do you think? Do you agree or disagree?
Well, first of all, I think it's a brilliant statement to propose.
The greatest.
Yeah, it's really the best out of all 6. But I think, it's funny that I'm doing these executive interviews now. And just real quick to what Rachel was just talking about, as far as leaders being more human, gosh, this COVID thing, you never want to say it's a good thing. Obviously, it's a horrible thing. But it's good for communications, because these leaders are understanding that people are working from home. I just did an executive leadership interview where the guy was sitting and he was talking to me. He's the CEO of a pretty big company, and he had to pause the interview because his kid's pet rabbit got out of the cage. And I saw this guy chasing around the rabbit around the room, and then he ends up holding the rabbit and finishes his interview with me. These people, so everything's changing for the good. But back to this. I was on an interview today with an executive. He said, Steve, we made a terrible mistake in the last 6 months. We did a survey 6 months ago before we hired you guys. And the thing that came back loud and clear was we're not being transparent enough. So I wrote his quote down from the interview. He goes, Steve, we went from, I guess, not being transparent enough to vomiting out everything constantly to everybody. And he goes, and nobody's paying attention to it. We over-communicate so much. Not everybody needs to see the whole iceberg. Pick which part of the iceberg they need to see. Make information relevant, make it customizable, make it personalized. Not everything needs to go to everybody. And I think that, we have a 6-word story at Crescenzo Communications that we try to teach across the world. As communicators, we need to do less and do it better. Do less and do it better. Focus. What's really important. We got to stop being Kinko's. I don't know if you guys have Kinko's in Europe, but we got to stop being everybody's private publisher. We got to stop being a copy shop. So-and-so wants to send an email, we send an email. So-and-so wants a PowerPoint deck, we deliver a PowerPoint deck. We need to stop just regurgitating stuff and considering distribution communication. I would rather under-communicate and then fill the holes where necessary after listening to our audience than just blanket everybody with everything in a world where they're buried in information. And so I would definitely agree with this, and I think it's hard because you go to different departments like HR, IT, marketing, and they all say, yeah, you know what? We got to rein in communications. We communicate too much. But you know what? My stuff has to get out. If you can stop everybody else from communicating, my stuff's the important stuff. But everybody has that attitude. So we got to figure out what our focus should be on behaviors that matter, changing behavior, and go from there. And we just do too much.
So thanks for the brief agreement there.
Oh, shoot, that was supposed to be, I thought it was my statement. I got to go longer.
But it was the greatest statement, wasn't it? So, Rachel Miller, what do you feel about this?
I'm going to jump in and disagree here. I don't think you can over communicate. If you feel like you are over communicating, you're probably just about cutting through. So when I saw that, my instinct was, I don't think you can over communicate. And if you're not sure, you need to listen to your employees and ask them, does it feel like we're over communicating? Because I don't always think we know as internal communicators unless we're listening to our employees.
Right. How about Rachel T?
I agree with Rachel, and I don't agree with Steve.
Well. Imagine if they're both from England. I'm ganged up on. I knew it. I'm the only guy, and I'm from the States. I did not vote
you're
for
not
Trump,
called
and
Rachel. You're not called Rachel, so
yeah.
on a losing streak there, Steve.
I'm covering my bias. Yeah, you've got to be called Rachel and be in England.
So Rachel T, why are you on the disagree bandwagon?
I agree with yeah, absolutely. I think blanketing the organisation with noise is never a good thing. But I think one and done's not a thing either, right? So, you know, there's lots of research about how many times people have to hear or see a message until it actually lands with them. There's that old marketing adage, the rule of 7, you know, that nobody's going to buy something until they've seen it or heard it 7 times. I don't know if that's true. Certainly not with me. I only need once, and it's mine. But
for the record, Rachel, I would like to find the person that said that and choke him slowly to death.
Wow.
At least so much bad practice isn't just same message over and over, and it becomes wallpaper after a while.
Absolutely, and you know, we're all agreed on that. But I do think there's a study by a psychologist called Ebbinghaus, which I remember it because it's called the forgetting curve, which I just think is lovely, and I'm going to write a book called that. So nobody write one before I get time.
Copyrighted now.
And it's about. And it found that we tend to halve our memory of newly found information in a matter of days and weeks. So we forget things that we forget what we learn if we don't revisit it often. As much as 80% over the course of a year if you just told something once. Whereas if you told something 12 times over the course of a year, that can go up to forgetting only about 20%. So we really, really do, from a psychology perspective, have to tell people and talk about it and revisit the learning and revisit the new information far more times than any of us would imagine. So yeah, we don't want to communicate the same message in the same format over and over and over again, because of course people will tune out. But I think, as Rachel M said, you know, we have to keep talking about the things that matter, and our people will tell us. They'll tell us if we're over communicating. I've very rarely been told I'm over communicating. Ever on important stuff. I've not heard it, in fact. So that's why I disagree.
There's a great comment here from Sarah Luca saying there's a difference between repetition and over communicating, Steve, she says. Totally agree.
There you go, Luca.
I would agree with Sarah, and I would agree with what Rachel just said. I think that, let's say you have a thing that you need to communicate. Does that mean you send the same message out 7 times, which a lot of companies do? No, but maybe you have a leadership message. Maybe you then do a story featuring an employee closest to the work. Then maybe you do an infographic, and then maybe you do a 1-minute video. And, you know, I agree with all that. And again, it all comes down to content. If your content's good, people will pay attention to it. But what I think we tend to do is we tend to regurgitate the same message again and again and again and again. And that's where Sarah's right. To me, that's what over-communication is, just sending the same thing to all the people again and again, over and over again. And I think a lot of companies, I've not done a focus group yet, and I've done thousands of them, where the first 2 things we hear is, I get too much stuff. And the second thing we hear is, I never hear about anything important. And the important stuff is going on. They're just not seeing it because they get too much stuff. So, I mean, I agree with both the Rachels that, you know, you're probably better off over communicating about key messages. But if we don't rein it in and try to do less and do it better and figure out, I think Brad Whitworth out in the chat here said, let them figure out what they want with customization, personalization, and layer the information so that they can get a quick summary. And the people that need to know more can then go get it. And they can get to watch a video or join a discussion or do whatever. I think we need to be more selective about that.
I think you're right. I think that there's often a lack of signposting. So some people will be reflectors and they'll want lots more information. So if we can signpost and make our channels work collectively well together, then you can point towards here's where to get much more information. Right. That's often missing.
Right. All right. Well, we are officially past the 1 hour mark. So I think with that, oops, I just killed the slides completely. So, you know, just they're gone. But with that, I'd like to move to the kind of the closing part of this. So first of all, I'd like to thank everybody that joined in the live session today. I think this might have been one of the most active chats we've ever had. Maybe it was you guys doing all the talking and kind of engaging everybody, but we really had a great crowd today. So thank you everybody for joining. I also want to mention that we have, of course, our next live session coming up. I'll put a button up on your screen right now. Don't worry, if you click on that, it won't take you away. You'll still hear our closing remarks, but we will be talking about what internal comms should be measuring in our next session, something that we touched upon today as well. with that, thank you guys so much for joining. Of course, if you're interested in a employee communications platform that, for example, helps you personalize your content delivery to each employee, feel free to check us out at smart.com. Rachel, and Steve, thank you guys so much for joining. Any last words of wisdom before we sign off?
Very quickly, very quickly, because I know we're late. First of all, thank you. I realize that I won the debate, and I appreciate that. Thank you very much. 2, please, you have my contact information. Please reach out to us for any communication needs. We'd love to talk to you. Or just if you had questions we didn't get to in the chat, I'd love to answer them via email. 3, I hope nobody realized that I pulled the old drinking the martini out of the coffee cup trick this entire time, which is great. And 4, I need to go because I'm going to write this book called The Forgetting Curve. So thank you both for everything. I love you all.
Right, Rachel T and Rachel M. Any last words?
I couldn't better that. Nor do I want Steve to feel bad because he came up with the 2 losing questions. So he did great at coming up with things that weren't true. Well done. And I just want to thank everyone for taking part, and thanks to my co-panelists. You are awesome.
You are great. I agree. This was really fun. Really fun. Thank you, guys.
Thank you. Final thought for me is just to everyone keep on keeping on. We are not through this pandemic yet, and everyone is working extremely hard. So it's great to have opportunities like this to get together and share stories and help each other. So thank you for inviting me. Pleasure to be part of it.
Great. Well, thank you guys. Again, everybody's contact information is on the screen right now. You'll get a recording that has it, so you can check it out if you didn't have time to write it up now. But with that, thank you everybody for joining, and yeah, see you at the next one. Bye.
Thank you, Alex and Smart, for hosting it. Wonderful.
Thank you.
Thanks for joining.
Bye.
Bye.